MSNBC tries to conflate Donald Trump's Madison Square Garden rally with a pro-Nazi demonstration. The Catholic vote could be the deciding factor in the 2024 election. And the Washington Post and LA Times experience internal revolts after refusing to endorse a presidential candidate. We have those stories and so much more. Blaze News Tonight starts right now. Welcome to the chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Monday, October 28th. With 8 days until the presidential election, a new survey of likely Wisconsin voters has Trump 1 point ahead of Harris in the key battleground state of Wisconsin and a slight lead there in New Hampshire. Now here to discuss is Blaze media critic Rob Eno, who's filling in for Matthew Peterson, and Justin Robert Young. He's the host of Politics podcast. So Justin, let's dive into these numbers because we know that they're within the margin of error right now. So can we give these polls any real weight at this stage?
Well, you know that with Wisconsin, any poll that shows anybody up more than a point is probably not going to happen because every election has been decided by within a point on either side of the aisle for the last several cycles. There is every indication to say that this is going to be just as close of an election as it was in 2020, as it was in 2016. What I would encourage people to do at this point, and obviously the polls are getting less and less relevant because early voting has already happened. But if you want to read this like many professionals do, don't look at the spread of what somebody is leading by. Instead, look at the vote share. If Kamala Harris is at 47% or below, that's where the Donald Trump campaign really wants them, because Donald Trump is essentially a hard-capped 48% candidate. There's a lot of independents that have just turned off their opinions on whether or not they're going to vote for him. Maybe that changes this cycle. That'd be good for them, but I don't think that they're expecting it. So if you see Kamala Harris down in the 47s, that's where you're more looking at.
Yeah, and what's interesting to me, it's also the trajectory seems to have been going towards Trump, right? And that Harris is below other places where she's been, especially with like African-American voters and things like that. I saw something today that said that she's spending the last week of the campaign, which is mind-boggling to me, on Black podcasts and urban radio stations for interviews. Do you think that they feel like they're hurting in that type of, with that vote, that they need to go get what should have been, sealed for 2 generations years ago?
Literally, as I was waiting to come on here, I saw a social media clip of Kamala Harris on Shannon Sharp's Club Shay Shay podcast, which some of your viewers might know as the place where Cat Williams went on for 3 hours in a wild interview that touched on a bunch of different extraordinarily taboo subjects. And instead they have Shannon Sharp literally reading off cards so he doesn't screw up the pre-written questions so Kamala Harris can get to her talking points. No, it's not a good sign for her to be trying to shore up, and not specifically the black vote, the black male vote, very specifically. They are very much worried about that. If you're going to steelman the argument, though, you would say, okay, they already have their solid 45%, maybe a little bit less than that is going to vote for her. These are true blue Democrats no matter what. They have spent a lot of time on the trail with Liz Cheney to try to get Never Trumpers, some of that Haley protest vote. And now what they want to do is try to shore up what they see might be deficiencies, places where that the Trump campaign has been trying to eat away at their base. That would be the glass half full argument for the Harris campaign. But I wouldn't say that it's ridiculous to say, well, maybe this is a major problem, because if there is tremendous attrition with the black male vote, it's not just a problem for Kamala Harris. It's a problem for the Democratic Party going forward.
All right, so that's what's happening with Kamala Harris. Now, if you look at Donald Trump, he has absolutely dominated this news cycle. You go back to last Sunday with him at McDonald's, and then he was on Rogan. I mean, everybody on Friday night. It was like a shared experience that we don't get anymore, but everybody was staying up and watching Donald Trump on Joe Rogan. And then you have Madison Square Garden, right? The rally. Everybody was still tuning in. Last I saw, it was 34 million that were tuning in to that rally across all of the different platforms. Does Trump have enough of this momentum right now to carry him to victory?
There's no doubt that this election is about Donald Trump, and both campaigns want it that way. We're going to find out which of the campaigns is right for that to be the case next Tuesday and possibly a few days afterward. But you're absolutely correct to say that the Trump campaign has orchestrated the media availability for this campaign to a T. That they have been able to make this as big as possible. And the Harris campaign has not been particularly interested, with a very few exceptions, of taking the attention away from Trump. You know, even today you have this gigantic news cycle pointing out the things that they don't like about Donald Trump's MSG rally, while in the background it is just baked in for the viewer that a Republican went into Midtown Manhattan and sold out Madison Square Garden, which is something that very rarely happens.
Yeah, people are focusing on that Tony Hinchcliffe Puerto Rico joke, right, as the big thing. But what's interesting is Tony Hinchcliffe, I looked it up, has 22 million podcast views in the past month. He goes after young men, which have historically gone for Democrats. So to me, it seems like it's additive. You know, I think that anybody that's offended by that joke already wasn't voting for Donald Trump. But I'm not sure if you see it that way.
Yeah, I mean, look, Senator Rick Scott of Florida, who's up for re-election, where there's a lot of Puerto Ricans that live, especially on that I-4 corridor that's always crucial. He apologized and said that he didn't like the joke. The Trump campaign itself has said that the joke does not necessarily comport with their values. Not only is Tony Hinchcliffe popular, his Kill Tony podcast played Madison Square Garden. So there is certainly that argument to say this is exactly what we are fighting against if you are the Trump campaign. This is not PC culture run amok. Sometimes you have to have a comedian go out there and say comedian things. The argument I would say against it is this. Anybody who's been to a Trump rally knows, and I've been to several to cover them, it's kind of a solemn event. Yes, people are there to have fun. Yes, they like it when Trump makes jokes, but it's not particularly a comedy club atmosphere or a roast atmosphere for anybody but Trump. And so I do think that Hinchcliffe probably got in a little over his skis just in terms of a tough room situation. And certainly for anybody who wants to look at it in a negative light, if you already believe that Donald Trump is running a racist campaign, then somebody calling Puerto Rico a floating pile of trash is probably going to further cement that. But ultimately, I don't know if any of that matters as much as a Republican sold out Madison Square Garden with 8 days to go before the election. I think ultimately that's really the big headline here.
Yeah, and Justin, they're mad about that. So, of course, what are they going to do? They're going to go back and say, hey, there was a pro-Nazi rally there in 1939. Let's go ahead and watch MSNBC and Tim Walz making this comparison.
That jamboree happening right now, you see it there on your screen, in that place is particularly chilling. Because in 1939, more than 20,000 supporters of a different fascist leader, Adolf Hitler, packed the garden for a so-called pro-America rally. A rally where speakers voiced anti-Semitic rhetoric from a stage draped with Nazi banners.
I look at this and I say, okay, we have to go back to the Nazis, right? At 1939. To make a comparison to something that Donald Trump is doing in 2024, right? Like there are multiple Israeli flags there, Justin.
Did you know that 21 years after that 1939 rally, there was a presidential candidate who held a rally in Madison Square Garden with the tagline, "Get America Moving Again"? That was John F. Kennedy, who held a rally in Madison Square Garden. Look, obviously, this is the closing argument for the Kamala Harris campaign, is that Donald Trump is a dangerous, unhinged, unchecked fascist that is going to destroy the country and democracy in general. We will see whether or not that's effective. If I were involved in their campaign, I would spend less time using my resources to direct attention to obvious Donald Trump wins, and I would do more to maybe get myself on stage with Taylor Swift during the Eras tour and change the narrative about where the momentum in this election is going. Because I do think that part of this for them is that Kamala Harris is not a known quantity. She's not Joe Biden. She's not Barack Obama. She's somebody that's been microwaved into the consciousness that a lot of hardcore partisans immediately, obviously, we're very excited about. But if you look at, into the people that you really need to excite, I do think that you do need to show that them leaving their house is going to be worthwhile. And that's what I would worry about when the campaign is totally tilted toward who she's not. You got to wonder if the marginal voters even know who she is.
Yeah, you said something that earlier that really stuck in my mind. In 2010, I was in Massachusetts and very heavily helped Scott Brown win that Kennedy seat, right? And the entire election was Scott Brown saying, I will be the 41st vote to stop Obamacare. And Martha Coakley, his opponent, saying he will be the 41st vote to stop Obamacare. Yes. Which was his winning message, right? Yes. So it's like this Nazi thing and the focus on Trump. It's insane to me. And the Democrats are now warning Kamala Harris. Michael Schellenberger had a tweet a little while ago, right before we came on, of a Washington Post story where the Washington Post is saying these Democratic get out the vote groups are telling her to stop it because it's not working. And it's odd that they keep doing it. And she doesn't say who she is.
I have a theory that there are certain words, like Lyndon Baines Johnson had this rule that he didn't want anything in his speech that was more than 2 syllables. He wanted very simple, plainly communicated speeches because he knew that these college-educated speechwriters would use words that communicated within their environment, but maybe not to the people of Texas for whom he was representing, and then eventually as vice president. I think that fascist is a bit of a Frasier word. Like a word that Frasier and his brother would talk to each other about, and then they'd cut to the dad, and the dad would be watching football, and that would be the joke. It's something that specifically college-educated people react to and history-focused people react to, but it doesn't have a lot of kitchen table agency. Unless you explain why the fascist government is affecting you, why a thing that you want to do will now be blocked, then you have a harder time with just the wide, broad brush. Even if you want to paint Donald Trump as an anti-democratic threat, you need to spell out the actual real world harms for the voter right now. Because the trust me bro stuff, I don't think has the same purchase power as I want to fix the border or I want to get inflation under control in a 60-30 wrong track, right track environment.
Right. And the thing that they're saying that he's fascist about is wanting to get the border under control, which is what they're voting on.
Yeah, I mean, there's no end to where and why and how and when Donald Trump is fascist. The other thing that I would worry about it from an advocacy perspective is just how many times we run this one.
Right.
We ran it in 2016, didn't work, close, but no cigar. 2020, you got over the hill, but also that's COVID and Donald Trump was the president. So you're able to run against the current administration where people thought things were going wrong because there was a lot of death and economic despair in the air. But now you're defending the fort.
Yep.
So
Justin, the way that it looks is when they go out there and they say Trump is a fascist, he's not going to give up power. Well, guess what? He gave up power and now he's running again. And so at some point, the arguments just don't ring true anymore. But we'll take 90s TV references every time you come on, Justin. Thanks so much for your time today.
Well, toss salads and scrambled eggs to you.
There you go. When we come back, we will unpack how abortion policy could sway the Catholic vote. Just ahead. We all know that there's a lot at stake with this upcoming election. We were just talking about it. But regardless of who's sitting in the White House, the fuse on the economy has already been lit. Even 4 years of a conservative presidency will not be enough to turn the tide on our $35 trillion national debt. And if the left wins, it's It's going to be like throwing gas onto the dumpster fire. But you don't have too much control over the election's outcome. Unfortunately, you can go vote. But what you can do right now, in addition to that, is go protect your savings by diversifying into gold with the help from Birch Gold Group. Because for millennia, gold has stood firm in the face of greedy governments, all the economic upheavals and global strife. And it can protect you right now. Birch Gold will help you convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA of physical gold. It'll be tax-free and penalty-free, and it won't cost you a penny out of pocket. In the last 4 years, the buying power of the US dollar has declined, and the price of gold has increased 40%. Do you think that's a coincidence? Text the word Jill to 989898 and get your free info kit on gold, and trust Birch Gold to protect your savings. Text Jill to the number 989898 today.
We are so happy to be standing here on this stage as proud country Texas women supporting and celebrating the one and only Vice President Kamala Harris.
Well, there you see Beyoncé joining Kamala Harris at her rally last Friday, where Harris claimed that if Donald Trump became president, he will implement a nationwide abortion ban. So here to discuss is Brian Burch. He's the president of Catholic Vote. So Brian, like it or not right now, Trump has said this is a state's issue, right? So at this point, a national abortion ban is not even on the table.
Well, you're right. The only person talking about doing anything from a national level with abortion is Kamala Harris, who's saying if she gets into office, her number one priority will be imposing a national abortion law that would allow any abortion for any reason paid for by taxpayers on the entire country, including states that have regulated abortion at different levels, as you know. But again, Donald Trump has said for now, there's not a consensus in the country. We're going to leave it to states to try to work out this question. But Kamala Harris is looking to nationalize abortion in a way that would divide and rip this country apart. And it's exactly the wrong direction that we need to go.
Hey, Brian, a piece for the National Catholic Register argues that Catholics could decide the 2024 election. Do you think this is true? And also the other publication that people often get confused with, the National Catholic Reporter, which is the Liberation Theology version.
National Communist Reporter is what I call it. Yeah.
They had an article that says that Catholics must vote for Harris. Where is the Catholic vote lying, and where do you think that it'll end up in 2024?
Well, historically, the Catholic vote is very predictive of the outcome, in part because we have a lot of swinging Catholics that go back and forth between each of the parties every cycle. And traditionally, many Catholics have voted for Democrats. What we're now seeing in the polls, and I looked at some polling just this morning, Donald Trump is up double digits, as high as 17, 18 points in some of these swing states with Catholics. So we've been predicting, and I think if these numbers hold, that Trump is going to have some of the largest numbers of Catholic voters in recent history, at least. Of course, JFK was the high mark. But since that time, we've seen an exodus of voters out of the Democratic Party. And I think Trump is going to put a kind of stamp on that trend and potentially have a watershed moment.
Yeah, we had Jack Posobiec on the show last week. He was going into Latin masses there in Pennsylvania and trying to turn out the vote. What is Catholic Vote doing right now to try and mobilize these people and get them to the polls?
Well, we have people on the ground. We have over 2,000 volunteers across 7 different states. We have about 20 full-time staff working Catholic voters, making contact with them by phone, by text, by written postcard. And of course, we have a number of ads running. Just this last week, we launched a new ad with RFK with a direct appeal to Catholic voters. We believe he represents a voice for that middling Catholic voter who's trying to decide maybe to vote for the Republican for the first time. And he's a great example of someone the Democratic Party has left behind. And so we produced that ad. It's obviously going viral online. We're running it in Pennsylvania right now. We're really focused and think Pennsylvania is going to be the state that decides this. Huge portion of Catholics there, about 30% of the electorate. A lot of them very unhappy with Kamala Harris. Joe Biden, of course, was a Scranton boy, Catholic. So he had some appeal to a lot of those voters, but he's not on the ballot this time. And so they can't play that kind of social justice card they've played in the past. And of course, he postured as a devout Catholic and then got into office and stabbed us in the back. It's a very different Democratic Party than we've seen before.
Yeah, on that note, right, I'm Catholic. I grew up Catholic up in the Northeast in Massachusetts. And you talk to some of your friends that are Catholic and are voting for Kamala Harris and trying to tell these folks that the Biden-Harris administration would put them and their kids in jail if they would maybe go and protest in front of a Planned Parenthood clinic. I don't think that they understand how bad the Kamala Harris administration has been towards Catholics. How do you convince them? How are you guys convincing them that they are that bad?
It's funny. It's so bad that in some of the cases, when you talk about the facts and what she's proposing to do, people don't think it's believable. She did send the FBI to Mark Houck's home in the early morning and arrested him in front of his whole family. She did try to disqualify a member of the Knights of Columbus and said, because you are a Catholic, you do not belong in the federal judiciary. And just recently, she did say that if elected, she would push a national abortion law that would not accommodate any religious believers. That means no more Catholic healthcare in the United States, no more Catholics practicing medicine consistent with their moral and ethical beliefs. And of course, famously, just a week ago, said Christians are at the wrong rally. I think it's very clear for her, we're not just at the wrong rally. What we believe she thinks is no longer belongs in this country.
Yeah, Brian, I don't know how many different government agencies have to turn against Catholics and the like to actually get these people to wake up and pay attention. Thanks so much for your time and for bringing light to this issue.
Thanks for the coverage. Everyone needs to get out and vote now if you can.
Amen. We'll catch you later, Brian. Thanks so much. When we come back, the LA Times and Washington Post have refused to endorse Kamala Harris for president. Chris Bedford will break down the employee tantrums next. All right, we do need you to get out and vote in November for the polls. But you know what? Right now, you can vote every single day with your dollar at goodranchers.com. You can make a choice about supporting American meat, American agriculture, and making your voice heard for transparency in our food. And, Good Ranchers sources their meat exclusively from American farms, which not only supports all the local ranchers, but that makes sure that you have the high quality American raised meat with no antibiotics, no hormones, or the seed oils that you don't want. And when you shop at goodranchers.com, you're going to make a statement about the kind of values that you stand for. It's quality and hard work and dedication to the American tradition. And right now, Good Ranchers is having their presidential promo. So for a limited time, you can get an add-on for a whole 4 years. So when you subscribe to any of their boxes, you get to decide if you want the extra chicken breast, the ground beef, the smoked bacon, or the wild-caught salmon in your order for 4 years. And it's a perfect way to ensure that you have high-quality American meat in your kitchen. And every cut comes individually packed and vacuum sealed, and it makes your life so much easier. There's no messy meal prep, no wasted food. Everybody hates that. But Good Ranchers, you know what? They help you get the most flavor and value out of every ounce of meat you buy. And in this economy right now, that matters more each day. So don't miss out. Use my code Jill to claim this presidential promo worth over $1,200. And also claim $25 off your first box plus free express shipping and bring 100% American meat to your family meals until 2028. It's goodranchers.com, code Jill. Goodranchers.com, American meat delivered. The LA Times and Washington Post declined to endorse either presidential candidate, but does anyone really care? Here to discuss is Blaze senior politics editor Chris Bedford. He wrote about this in his latest Beltway brief. But Chris, I look at this and isn't this a little bit of foreshadowing? Doesn't this indicate good things for Donald Trump if the leftist organizations aren't out there endorsing Kamala Harris?
Well, yes, on multiple fronts. One, not endorsing a candidate, it doesn't really matter these days. There's literally no one who was waiting for the LA Times or the Washington Post's endorsement to decide who to vote for. The only people who were waiting for this were the editorial writers who were so obsessed with their own point of view and so convinced that the world just hangs on their every word, despite 8 years of evidence being compiled in every single interaction they've had with the public. To the contrary, that they're angry. So they're quitting en masse, which is a really wonderful thing to see, because the world definitely needs plenty of unemployed Washington Post and LA Times editorial writers who attack their bosses. That's exactly the kind of thing that a newspaper is looking to publish, and I'm being sarcastic on that front. But even more than that, they're also not endorsing Kamala Harris. They're kind of hedging their bets. They're saying, well, maybe we're not going to use our firepower. And something about that tells me that the publishers and the owners who have made this decision are simply sick of 8 years of temper tantrums from their employees. And to show this, they've said, we're not going to endorse. We're just going to stay back. And they've been greeted with more and more temper tantrums. And I think this is a little foreshadowing to, if Kamala Harris loses the election, despite massively outspending her opponent, despite indicting her opponent and trying to put her opponent in prison, despite multiple assassination attempts on her opponent, despite impeaching her opponent for completely ridiculous and scurrilous accusations, despite actually successfully, I think it might have been a little rigged, but successfully unelecting her opponent, she still actually can't beat him. So if she loses this election in 8 days now, this kind of turning on the publishers, turning on Bezos, turning on the owner of the LA Times, turning on each other is kind of a foreshadowing of the Democrats' civil war that you're going to see. Maybe these folks aren't going to take it lying down. Their power has been decreasing every single day. The more they attack Donald Trump, the higher his popularity goes. But as opposed to looking outward or even inward and saying, where is his popularity coming from and where have we gone wrong? They're kind of circling around a firing squad to turn on each other. And well, I think that's good news for everyone except for them.
Yeah. Just want to remind people that if they want to read the full article for this or get Bedford's newsletter in their email box, they can go to theblaze.com/Bedford. Bedford never likes to give you that actual URL. So figured I'd give it for you. But what's interesting to me about
we'll let you
this,
come back if you do that more often, Rob. That's
there
good.
we go. What's interesting to me, though, is it seems like people in the media don't think that they actually have bosses. And I think you kind of alluded to that, right? They're always like, I can't believe that the owner of the paper is making an editorial decision. Like the person that owns the ink has no say in the newspaper, that it's only the reporters and the people there. But I think that that's kind of a entitlement thing for the entire left, right? They don't think that they have to answer to anybody. And you alluded to a civil war. Where else besides just, the media rooms do you think you'll see these sorts of things? Is it going to be nonprofits that might realize that, we need to get more conservative voices or we need to be more nonpartisan? Because the biggest joke is that a nonpartisan outlet is, actually nonpartisan.
Oh, you're totally right on a publisher actually having a say in newspapers. The idea that publishers don't have a say in newspapers is ahistorical in every aspect. We used to annoy our old boss, the Daily Caller, Neil Patel, by calling him the Colonel because he had a fairly iron hand sometimes in different editorial affairs or different things around the company. But we took that nickname from the old head of the Chicago Tribune, the owner, called the Colonel, who was known for calling down to reporters and making decisions or making calls and saying, here's where I want you to be covered. Here's where I want your coverage. It's only in very modern times reporters, and these reporters don't have a lot of history. You can kind of tell that from the fact that they compare everything to Hitler and antebellum slavery without any real historical aspect. They don't actually understand anything about history. They don't even know the history of their own outlets. They don't know the way that this has gone. And the publisher of the Washington Post made that point when he said, we didn't used to make endorsements. It's only in the modern era we've made endorsements. Or endorsements only hurt our ability to be actually fair. They don't make it better, so we're no longer going to do them. Then they want to launch the Civil War because over the last 8 years, they have turned every aspect, not just the editorial aspect, but also the business aspect, the advertising aspect, the money-making aspects, into part of their kind of crusade to get them into their heroic status that they imagine themselves as French resistance fighters or whatever they have when they march around their bedrooms in their berets at night. And the same thing is going to be true about the nonprofits. Nonprofits and the left, which are massive, they blow away right-wing nonprofits. Their funders on the left take it very seriously. people on the right should take notice, by the way, because they're extremely efficient at this. But they have been hobbled in the last couple of years by a new generation of revolutionaries who are overtaking their bosses, constantly sensing microaggressions, constantly demanding that they take different stances, which maybe the Gen Zers in their lower levels of staff and HR departments think are necessary, but they're not moving voters. They're not changing laws in the way that they could be. They've been crippling the left wing's nonprofits. So what we've seen over this last decade is essentially a woke revolution. And don't buy into that kind of framing that this is just a pendulum that's going to swing back. It gets worse and worse every year because the ground they take is not surrendered often. It's rarely surrendered. They change they move the Overton window. Decisions are made. People are afraid to speak out in this country in a way that we haven't seen in modern times about their politics. But the actual fervor of this revolution is burning out. It's kind of like, reminds me almost like of a nonviolent version of the French Revolution, where people started to look around after a while and said, well, who came up with this idea? Why did we turn on so many of our colleagues? Why did we turn on so many people who should have been our allies? They've been doing that for years. It's hobbled them. And if they do lose this election, which I think is looking more and more likely each day, then they're going to turn on those folks who made those decisions. And those revolutionary types, they're just going to give up. It's not going to be easy. You're going to see a civil war in the Democratic Party. We've already started to see it with people lining up against the squad, Democratic primaries. You're going to see that intensify to a degree that we're not used to. Usually, Republicans are the ones shooting each other. But now I think Democrats' party discipline is going to start to break down.
Well, Chris, you talk about Donald Trump is Hitler, and they tried to say that his rally at Madison Square Garden yesterday, there was a pro-Nazi rally. But we know that's false. We know that's not how things went. It felt more like a second RNC to me. Chris, did you get that feeling with some of the similar people that were on stage? Just the way that they made this an entire experience at MSG yesterday.
Yes, and Madison Square Garden has 80 years of history of hosting massive events. Young Americans for Freedom's first national event was at Madison Square Garden. I think it was in 1961. They absolutely packed the place with people who are supporters of Barry Goldwater and other conservatives. They pack it for sporting events. But this is the first time in decades I have seen it packed for a political conference, and it wasn't even one where they had to lie and pretend that Beyoncé was going to be giving a concert. All these people came not for the early speakers, but for Donald Trump, and they left absolutely thrilled. And yes, I mean, these are people even more so than the RNC, which I had the fun of covering for the Blaze. A lot more normal people in this crowd, a lot more people who just brought their kids out to see a piece of history, to cheer it on. And for the media to go back and say, well, actually, these are Nazis, because Madison Square Garden, a very ugly but iconic American stadium, is somehow associated with the Nazis. That's not true. It doesn't make sense. It's not convincing voters.
Has anybody told the resident artist of the Madison Square Garden, Billy Joel, who I think is Jewish, that it's a Nazi haven? Which gets me to the point. There was a Holocaust survivor who flew in from Israel, and I think this is the guy that made the joke, hey, I just got off the plane from Israel and I thought I'd go to a Nazi rally, joking about it. And the media says, guy comes and admits that it's a Nazi rally. I mean, the amount of just snippets that they've been able to take out of context from this rally really goes to what we were talking about before, just how the media twists everything and doesn't give anybody context to what's being said.
Yes, they rolled right over the fact that there was literally a Holocaust survivor there. They rolled right over the fact that there were Hasidic Jews in attendance and Orthodox Jews and other observant Jews. And of course, because they are so historically literate, they rolled over the fact that there was a large Catholic presence. You know, people don't realize, a lot of leftists don't realize this. You went to concentration camps if you're an observant Catholic in the Third Reich. It wasn't some kind of Christian thing. It was a neo-pagan death cult. It was a complete aberration. That's why it's so interesting in European history as compared to all the other slaughters, is because it was so outside of the norm. They took over the churches. They imprisoned priests. They made martyrs. They made saints. A lot that gypsies were imprisoned. this was not that. This was among the most multi-ethnic gathering that you've seen of the Republican Party in decades, because it's people who look at the Democratic Party, they don't see a home, they look at Donald Trump, they see someone who's speaking to their needs, their worries, their desires, and also, I think this is a main thing, this is why he's a big attraction, is giving it back to the people who have messed with them, with a system that is generally not answering their needs, who's punching it right in the face, who's him and JD Vance, they're going on. They're telling Jake Tapper that he's absolutely full of it right to his smug little face. And they love that. It's fantastic. And it's a show. It's the kind of, I have friends who brought their children up to go see this because it's a family friendly and fun event.
I absolutely loved that JD Vance interview. But you know what? The other thing that I loved is that Donald Trump was out there and he was trying to say the American dream is attainable. And right now, it's important to be able to hear that kind of messaging. Chris, the vibes are on our side, and I'm going to carry that through until Election Day. Thanks so much for joining us.
I'll see you tomorrow.
Homeschooling might be easier than you think. Our next guest will explain it all coming up. Well, Chris Bedford was just saying it. This election is about so much more than politics this time around. It's about making sure our borders are secure, making sure that we are actually protected in our communities. And when disaster strikes like it did in Western North Carolina, we have a government that actually is going to show up for its people. So what we need you to do, of course, get out there and vote. But then on election night, you're going to want to be a member of Blaze TV so you can join me and everybody else here at Blaze TV while we have our coverage for the 2024 presidential election, because we know right now we're at a crossroads and the future of our nation is being decided in real time. And this is your chance to be part of something amazing. So this election night, Blaze TV, we're going to have boots on the ground all across the country. Our correspondents are going to be having the pulse of the night straight from where the action is happening. All you have to do is subscribe, and then you can experience the pivotal night here with us. At Blaze TV, we speak the truth. There's not going to be any spin, none of the filters. We're just going to have real talk and break down what's happening in real time. And we'd love to have you join us. So go to blazeelection.com/BNT and get $40 off. That's it. All you have to do is go to blazeelection.com/BNT for $40 off. Can most parents homeschool their children? Well, more families than ever are considering homeschooling as an option, and it may be easier than you think. Author Neil Shenvi believes it's possible, and he wrote about it for theblaze.com, and he joins us right now. So, Neil, how can most parents homeschool their kids?
I like to say if you can read and you can add and multiply, then you can homeschool your kids at least through third grade. These are kids learning their numbers and letters and shapes and how to read board books. You can do it.
Yeah, I think a lot of other parents, right, when they're doing the homeschooling, in addition to the can I do it, they think that people in society have told them that their kids will be less developed because they're not with other kids and they're not doing things like that. Can you talk about how the homeschooling community kind of fills that gap?
Well, there really is a community. So we're involved in a homeschooling co-op called Classical Conversations. There are many co-ops throughout the country, and you'll find like-minded parents. They do various kinds of models of education. We're at a classical school, so we study Latin. We read ancient texts. We read primary sources. But if you're more interested in science and math, there are homeschooling co-ops for you. And they get to hang out with their friends maybe once or twice a week, maybe more. They have 3-day-a-week co-ops some places. So it prevents the charge that, oh, your kids won't be socialized. They'll be awkward and weird. I don't find that. The homeschool kids that I've interacted with are incredibly social. They can talk to adults. They can talk to each other. They can relate to other kids. They do kids things like Pokemon and sports, and they're just great kids.
All right, when it all comes down to it, it's all about the academics at the end of the day, right? So how academically do homeschool kids compare to those in public schools right now?
So the vast majority of surveys and studies show that they compare very favorably to their public school counterparts. Now, there is a selection bias because obviously involved parents homeschool their kids more often than uninvolved parents, I mean, almost by definition. So because of that, you're selecting some kids who tend to have better educated parents and wealthier parents. And yet the comparison is always favorable. So the burden of proof is on people that say, oh, these kids are not going to make it in school. That's not what the studies say so far.
Yeah. And, during COVID, right, everybody was distant learning, right? Like they kicked all these kids out of the home and basically everybody became a homeschooler because they were doing distant learning. Can you talk more about how technology and these co-ops might play a role in homeschooling? Are you teaching your kid every class, or are there online resources that they may be using to get some of the education that you're kind of helping to guide them on?
Great question. So our co-op provides a complete curriculum, but we also supplement with math, reading, and writing on our own. And then because I have a PhD in theoretical chemistry, so I'm very comfortable teaching my kids, obviously, science and math. But we supplement with online courses. MIT, I think Caltech have a huge course catalog that's absolutely free. You can just have your kids watch these college courses. You can sign them up for local community college courses. My 10th grader is about to take Calculus 2 at a local community college. So those resources are available to anyone who wants to use them, and many of them are free. So absolutely, if you feel under-equipped to tell your kids about art history, we'll sign them up for a college class or a local community college class.
Well, that advice sounds great because, it probably is a big hurdle mentally for them to jump over as a parent saying, I'm going to undertake how much to get this started. So what's some advice that you have for parents out there just to take that very first step?
Talk to someone in your community who does homeschool. We actually were first exposed to the idea of homeschooling about 15 years ago at our church. We had some friends who homeschooled their kids, and these kids were amazing. They were polite, well-behaved, very smart, sociable. And we said, hey, we should think about this. And then later, a friend of ours had a kid slightly older than our youngest who was homeschooled, and they said they loved it. So find someone that you know and trust and just ask them frank questions like, how did you do it? Is it going okay? Was it hard? What are the challenges? And you'll be probably amazed to find out that it's doable.
We talked a little bit about outcomes before, right? How they compare. One of the things that's happening in schools, and I think a lot of our audience that might be boomer age or higher, doesn't understand that young men, that boys are almost treated like second-class citizens in school, and they're not going to college at the same rates as girls. They're not, excelling at the same rates as girls because of what's happening. Is that disparity still there in homeschools, or do you see more of a level playing field with the people that come out of a 13-year or 12-year homeschool education?
It probably depends a lot on the parents, right? But I think in general, parents know their kids best. Parents of boys want the best for their boys. Parents of girls want the best for their girls. So they're not going to treat any child like a second-class citizen. So that's the nice thing about having a non-standardized educational approach, is that you know what your kids need and want, where their talents lie. And so you can choose to focus on areas where you feel your kids excel. So that, and actually one of the other niche area of homeschooling that's growing drastically is African Americans are homeschooling their kids at greater rates. And part of that is because they feel like the educational system is failing Blacks in particular, so they're choosing to homeschool. And I think that's great. Again, you are the best educator for your kids because you know them best and love them best.
Absolutely. And you know what? If you want to read more, you can go find his article at theblaze.com. Neil, thanks so much for your time, because this is such an important subject to get people just aware of. And if they can take that first step, we encourage them to do so. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
When we come back, we'll wrap up the show. Don't go anywhere. It was a very MAGA weekend. Not only Donald Trump filling Madison Square Garden and, over 70,000 people outside, if you believe the police reports, but also when you watched the football game, Rob, this weekend, the 49ers, they were having the post-game interview, and Brock Purdy was being interviewed, and his teammate Nick Bosa came up and actually crashed the party. He had a MAGA hat on, and he's like, it's a very important election, right? And this reminds me. Now, Nick Bosa has never been scared to wear the MAGA hat. He has worn it proudly for quite some time. But it feels like the tide is turning, right? Like other people in New York, on the streets of New York City, they were proudly wearing MAGA hats, right? It's something that you used to just say, okay, maybe I shouldn't wear this. Maybe I'll wear it when I get to the event. Now people are just openly wearing these.
Yeah, they absolutely are. And especially in places like New York City or Massachusetts or San Francisco, right? Nick Bosa wore a MAGA hat at the press conference. 2 fans were rejected for going into the stadium and told by the security person that they had to throw the hat away in order to get into the stadium. And we saw that at a Mets game in New York where that happened, right? There were people doing it. They actually ended up getting let in with the hat. But you used to fear, in some cases, you used to fear for your safety, right? I mean, I remember back in the Tea Party days, there was an African-American gentleman at a Tea Party rally that had a live free, not a live free or die hat, but the Gadsden flag hat, the don't tread on me hat or t-shirt, and he got beat up by some leftists, right? There are people felt real fear to do it, but I think as more people are coming up and the tide of this election is changing. I mean, there's the Gallup poll, the New York Times Siena poll today said that almost as many people think that Donald Trump was right to challenge the election as not right to challenge the election. There is definitely a tide turning.
With Chris Bedford, we talked about the newspapers that were very upset that they were not going to be able to come out and endorse Kamala Harris. What is the mood of those in the leftist media? What's going to happen when and if Donald Trump wins?
I think they're going to be apoplectic as much as they were in 2016, if not more, right? They don't get that people actually don't like them. Our favorite Mr. Potato Head, Brian Stelter, today tweeted out a story that said that the MAGA rally at Madison Square Garden, it wasn't his story, but just reinforced the anti-media narratives of the Republican Party and of Republicans. Over 2/3 of Americans don't trust the media. That's not just a Republican problem. That's a media problem, and they don't understand that it's them that does it. It goes to what Bedford was saying, right? And I didn't get a chance to say it when Bedford was saying it. He said that there used to be reporters that reported facts, and it's changed a lot. Well, that's because everybody thinks that they're a journalist now, and they think that journalism comes with it activism. When you hear these people say what they're doing, like, I'm not able to tell the stories that are important to me and to society anymore. No, your job is to go to an event, write down what was said, and report on it, and maybe find somebody with a different point of view and put it in. It's not to inject your point of view into what you're writing.
It sounds like Mitch McConnell doesn't want to deal with Donald Trump in leadership. He has announced that he's going to step down as the Senate leader in November. Steve Dace posted on X, he said he'll just be replaced by a younger version, likely dumber, unless Trump steps in and does something about it. But the fact is, things are going to change.
Absolutely. I mean, Mitch McConnell, except for, judges and a couple of other things, has killed every conservative agenda item. And I think that Steve's absolutely right. The establishment doesn't go away easily. It will take Trump or J.D. Vance or somebody saying, no, you've got to do this. And remember, there's going to be an empty open seat. And who is Mike DeWine going to appoint if that's what he can do?
Well, 8 days until the big day. It's going to get crazier and crazier. We still are waiting for the October surprise. I don't know if we're going to get one this year or not, but we will definitely be here to break it all down for you tomorrow night.